Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this sectional presentation by Dr. Eric Sarwar. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada, and I'm very happy to welcome Eric and also to welcome all of you to this, what I think is going to be a really fascinating session on the Psalms and their role in our dialogue with our Muslim brothers and sisters. So I will be monitoring the chat throughout the session. And if you have questions or comments that you'd like to make, please write those into the chat as you think of them. And we're going to save those for the end. And I'll be coming back on screen to place those questions and comments to Eric. So with all that, I'd like to again introduce Dr. Eric Sarwar, who received his PhD from Fuller Seminary and actually was a lovely scholar with the Hymn Society back in 2014 and 2015, and now here he is. So please help me to welcome him.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, and it's indeed a great pleasure for me. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mike, and it's indeed a great pleasure for me to be with all of you this evening through this virtual session, although, you know, we all love to be with each other while we are here. So before further ado, those who are here, thank you very much for joining me. Although I cannot see you, but you can see me. And salam to you all. And let me share my screen with you, and then I'll go from there. Okay, here we are. So as the title, you can see that practices of Psalmody, a congregational singing for Muslim-Christian friendship in the 21st century. Well, as might you are aware that in 2012, I think Dr. Emily Brink, you know, she's supposed to be with me, but because of lots of things altogether from past 1.5 months, I was unable to send her the proper, proper section details. So that's why you can hear only me right now. But anyway, the idea of these practices of Psalmody, I give credit to Dr. Emily Brink because that was her article, which I read first. And then meanwhile, while I was working on my own PhD dissertation on the Punjabi Psalter and how can that Psalter work and engage with our Muslim neighbors in Pakistani context. So these historical practices of Psalmody article by Dr. Emily Brink and my own research and data analysis using Book of Psalm for Muslim-Christian relationship actually gave birth to this presentation or this like a paper, which I later on will be publishing somewhere. But anyway, this is just a synopsis. You know, in one session, I cannot cover the whole practices of Psalmody, but I will just give you some glimpses, some nuggets actually to taste, just sharing with you some that you can get an idea what this is all about. So what I'm going to do, I will share my first, what are the historical roots and what are the genres of historical Psalmody in Judeo-Christian heritage, and then I will bring it and converge it, see how can they resonate with the currently or the from past continually 14th centuries practices of religious sound or the Islamic religious music around the world, or also especially in my context, and how we in the Western Church can learn and can adopt these practices to engage with our Muslim friends. So let's go and see what we can share and learn from each other. So first of all, let me take you to here. Okay, so the practices of Psalmody, we can see that there are Emily Brink in her article in 2000, I think it was 2012, if I'm not wrong. So that is mistake. 2002 is mistake. It was 2012. Well, Dr. Emily, if you are looking, we can correct later on, but I think the date is 2012, if I'm not wrong. Anyway, so Dr. Emily Brink actually shared in her article, Practice of Psalmody, 3 distinct ways of Psalmody, which she called chant, meter, and responsorially. So, well, in my own research, metrical or meter came later on and during after Reformation, when the Western or the Genevan Psalter, all this emerged. So that's a later one, but when we go back before Reformation, there are 3 distinct practices which come out from the historical tradition. So before going to that, I am quoting that what is the importance of Psalm as a cultural text. So Dr. Roberta King and Hebert, actually Paul Hebert, those were missiologists and communication specialists in the mission circles. They both agree that translating Psalms into cultural text fosters faithful friendship among Muslims. So how that will work? What is a cultural text mean? So let me explain first. The cultural texts are oral, non-verbal cultural forms, for example, music, dance, and drama, that translate the written text into culturally embedded performing art and local music cultures in order to communicate the message. So actually the idea is to communicate the message in a way that the host culture could understand, then translate, and then apply to them. So that's the actual purpose of the cultural text. So when I'm talking about the Muslim context, sadly, or might be, I could say that disappointedly, in my opinion, that was a Western printed textual approach to oral and memorized culture where text has less importance. That's what we are trying to do right now. It's kind of a decolonizing the missional or our engagement with our Muslim neighbors. So all this textual approach in the oral culture, the written approach in the culture people are orally literate. It's really for me it's really hard to understand actually why we were practicing from last 14 centuries engaging in the oral culture with the literary text. Anyway, so now what are the parallels which I find out? So because based on these 3 historical practices, I find out that there are parallel with 3 Muslim religious music culture. Well, 3 genres. There are lots of others, Islamic religious sound culture, but I'm going to share only with the relating 3 with this 3 historical Psalmody 3 practices and 3 practices of in the contemporary Muslim culture. Okay, now the aim of this presentation is to present that historical practices of Psalmody in Eastern context. So I will not going to Western culture, as I mentioned earlier, that after Reformation, mostly metrical Psalmody comes out from the Western hemisphere. But my focus will be on the Eastern side, because the reason is that because Islam emerged from the Arabia, and then within the first 6th century, in the first half of the 6th century, they captured all Christian areas. That's include North Africa, that's include Levant, Syria, Iraq, Turkey, every area or every stronghold of Christianity was under the Islamic influence within next 30 to 40 years of since the rise of Islam. So obviously Islam encountered these religious practices, and I will share a little bit further that what are the historical and geographical links with that particular practices. Okay, so Psalms in Eastern context, like chanting, responsorial, and antiphonal, converge with the Islamic practices of the number 1, the chanting of the Quran, which is called Kirat, and then Nasheed or Naat, which is the eulogy or in the praise of the Prophet, and then Marsia. Marsia is the Shiite practice, which it's like a beating the chest and mourning on the massacre of the Prophet and the family of the Prophet by the majority Sunni, the Sunni brothers in the Islamic history. So that's what we call the month of Muharram or the Marsiya. Now, so first of all, we all aware that chanting or the psalmody is the continuation of the Judeo-Christian heritage. So we read, and the history says that, and the Bible proved that, although Moses himself had left impressive examples of psalmody, we read Exodus chapter 15, and then Deuteronomy chapter 32, when he written a song, and the whole Torah was recited in the song form. And then we read that Psalm 90 is also a prayer of Moses in the book of Psalms. However, David actually credited with placing a particular emphasis on music in Israel's liturgical worship. So that's the continuity, and we see that Jesus Christ with his disciples at the Passover liturgy, or the church, while in the Colossians chapter 3, Ephesians chapter 5, we all see that Paul encourages, exhorts, and Paul present his perspective to use psalmody as a pedagogical kind of example, to use that one. So that's what we're talking about. So anyway, I'm sorry. So however, we see that there is also challenge for the contemporary in the contemporary context. There's a huge debate on whether we use exclusively psalmody or shall we have inclusive psalmody. So as a hymn society, we all know that hymns play a great role for a pedagogical and for the theological and for the liturgical service to the church. But however, this is still a debate in a few denominational settings, where exclusive and inclusive psalmody is still, it's a bone of contention. But anyway, so let's go to the next one. So what are the parallel to Muslim practices, which we see that? Then the practices of psalmody. So number one, as I mentioned earlier, chanting of the Quran, recitation, then responsorial, nasheed by Sunnis, and responsorial, antiphonal, actually, singing of Sufi Sama. Well, I'm not going to cover Sufi Sama, but when I was relating on and understanding actually the responsorial, the Sufis, Sama, or Sama means hearing, the Sufi practice also fall into antiphonal, because the Qawwali, or the word call in the Arabic, means repetition, repeating. So this is also group singing. Mostly Islamic Qawwali is a male dominant and has a kind of a call and response, or leader call, and then the party behind it, they respond to that. So this is what I'm going to talk about, and I'll show you a few video as well. Now, so psalmody genres, which I was talking that in the historical psalmody and liturgical historians, they actually divide Christian psalmody into two major parts. Number one is monastic psalmody, and number two is cathedral psalmody. So Dr. Taft, actually, he's a Roman Catholic scholar and the chair of the Vatican, I think, Department of the Liturgy. In his article, in his presentation, he talked about that these are the two basic earlier monastic and cathedral psalmody were dominantly in the earlier Christianity. So monastic psalmody, when we talk about, it's a continuity of a Hebrew chanting. Peters find out in his article. And then example of the monastic psalmody, we can understand that if we are aware that Coptic Orthodox chants, these are the good examples of this monastic psalmody. I have few Eastern examples which I could play for you. So let me go there and here. Here is. So this is an example. So if you observe clearly, this is a group singing and mostly monks. So they also added some tambourine and some cymbals over there. But I don't know the Coptics used of the engaging and bringing these metallic sound in between. But there are another Eastern practices where it is only based on a human vocal and a voice centric context. So here is another example. Such a beautiful chanting. And you can see that the monastic psalmody, it's for Hebrew chanting. I will share something else also with you, but these are two examples which I just shared with you, how the monastic chant sound that in the earliest second to third century, because I'm not going to cover onward from the 6th century because of the 5th and 6th century. I will relate these practices with the rise of Islamic spirituality and the Islamic liturgy. So anyway, so the cathedral psalmody is the another one. So cathedral psalmody designed for orally literate public participation. That's a big difference actually, monastic psalmody and the cathedral psalmody, because monastic psalmody was meditative, mostly on prayer, mostly on the personal piety and calling God and the word into their mouth and their mind, and the whole practices of reciting psalms. However, the cathedral psalmody was designed for the public participation. So you can see that the difference, the private monastic and the cathedral was the laity and the public, in engaging them into in the active participation, public participation, compared to monastic for meditational purposes. So these two are the main categories in the earlier 1st century, monastic and cathedral psalmody. So when we go further, so here are, so now the responsorial psalmody, that's interesting, because scholars and liturgical scholars find out that responsorial psalmody is congregational, repeating or respond a psalm verse or a short exclamation such as Alleluia after each segment or verse of the psalm intoned by the soloist or psalmist. So we need to remind ourselves that this is the time prior to printing revolution. Common people, they were oral literate, but they don't have copies of their own. Number two, they have only psalms which they were allowed to participate in the public or the cathedral or the responsorial psalmody, which they were led by the soloist or led by the cantor, which later entered in the liturgical orders. But however, so responsorial psalmody Congregational only repeating small phrases, a word like hallelujah, or something else, which was the half presentation or the half line or half verse of a particular psalm which they were talking about. So after each segment or the verse of the psalm intoned by the soloist or psalmist. So that was the responsorial. Mostly in today's contemporary culture, we might think that it was uh, like group singing, but it was not like group singing. It was just a congregational brief small phrase response, and then again the monks or the psalmist who were in the responsorial psalmody. So that was responsorial, and now antiphonal. So that's interesting. So when we say antiphonal, antiphonal actually is an elaboration of the responsorial method. It's the continuity, but with the little twist. So the origin of the antiphonal is Antioch during the 4th century. So again, generally, when today, and this side of history, after almost 1500 years, when we think about antiphonal psalms, our mind go back to the two group of choirs standing facing each other, and the one line by the other choir, the other line by the other choir, or something else. But anyway, this was not in the case. That was a different than the current practices. However, Dr. Teft actually find out 8 characteristics of antiphonal psalmody in the first 500 years onward, from second to 5th century. So I just picked 4, which I'm going to share with you. And it is this: it is usually non-biblical composition, but also adds hallelujah as the refrain after each verse of the psalm. Number 2, 2 choirs respond alternatively, but not the whole group, not the whole choir, but a soloist chants the psalm verse as the choir's head. So that was not antiphonal, not gone by the whole group of choir, it was gone by the soloist. Number 3, the antiphonal psalmody always conclude with the glory be to the Father. There's a difference between the responsorial and the antiphonal psalmody. And then number 4, sometimes doxology is split, and the choir repeat the refrain after glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit. Other choir concluding both now and unto the ages of ages. Amen. So that was kind of a main characteristic, 4 main characteristics out of 8, which I pick from the antiphonal psalmody. So this is now we have a picture. Now we know that, okay, so these were the practices, the Christian liturgy, which was the continuity of the Jewish synagogue and the temple liturgy adopted by the church, and the continually and explored and enhanced until the 5th century. So we have seen that chant, we have seen that responsorial, and now the antiphonal. Now here's the deal now. What is the meaning? So the psalmody and the rise of Islam. So that's interesting. So first of all, we need to know that, as I mentioned earlier, that the whole Levant, the whole Damascus, Iraq, Turkey, Constantinople, and Constantinople at not that time, but the first 5th century, but the North Africa, Jerusalem even. So all this majority of the Christendom was under the Islamic influence now. So before going further, so in the rise of Islam, I need to share with you a few terminologies which will be helpful to understand the relationship between the psalmody and the Islamic religious realm of religious music. So first of all, the Arabic term, the musical term of Qiraat means reading. So one more important thing, which I think will come later on also, the word Quran is not meaning, it doesn't mean a book or a manuscript. The word Quran means recitation, ikra. That was the first word actually when according to Islamic tradition, when Prophet heard the voice in the cave by the angel Gabriel, according to Islamic tradition, and what he says to him, ikra bismi rabbal lazi khalq. It means that recite or read in the name of the Creator who created the whole universe. So that's interesting. The word Quran is not a book. It's not a manuscript. It's a recitation. So the term kirat, reading, tartil is a Hebrew term, it's Arabic term, tartil or tilawa. Tilawat means psalmody. Here you go. So you can read, you can see that the word tartil and the method or the mode of the reading psalm is meaning psalmody. So tajweed, then later on, just like a metrical psalm or just like the Gregorian chant, when they standardize the chant, and they give some rules that how you are going to perform or read or the recite psalmody. That's the meaning of in Arabic is tajweed, from the root word jawad, means embellishment, adding and making it more beautiful, making it more acceptable. That these embellishments, so song, and then the word is in the Muslim context, they never use word for the religious text to recite or read. Ghina. Ghina is a song or a vocal music which was non-canonical intonation. So that's very important to understand the difference between the kira, ikra, tartil, and tajweed. The tajweed is a system actually, but compared to that, ghina, which is a commercial or a non-canonical singing, a vocal music, borrows from musical vocabulary. So these were already in the Muslim context or the Islamic tradition. These are word borrowed from the Islamic or that cultural context. And then the Arabic term zabur, along with zamar, means song. Zabur, actually, by the way, Arabic. Well, one Syrian scholar told me that actually Zabur is Arabic, but when we go to Syriac, it is Mizmor. That's where it's coming, that song. And Mizmor, psalm, is a derivation of zamar, meaning sing praises or make music. So these are key terms which will help us to understand the connection with the psalmody of connection with the Islamic practices. So cultural background, we need to understand that in the arrival of Islam during the 6th century, we all know that Eastern Christianity, Nestorian Christianity, Arius, and also a few other fraction groups in the Christendom, they were all present in the Arab Peninsula, and the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, known to these Christians, and he was aware of the Jewish presence also in that Arab Peninsula. The whole trade system and majority of the monotheistic practices were expressed by these groups. So anyway, so there was another culture, a very interesting cultural practice in the Mecca at that time, which they called the annual poetry contest. And during the 6th century, we read that. So during the 6th century, we read that the Bishop of Najran. So Bishop of, cancel that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I have to turn it off. I don't know how to turn it off. Anyway. So we read that the Bishop of Najran in Arabia reached out to Arab tribes during the annual festival of that region through the recitation of the poetry, a featured attraction at these week-long fair. So that's interesting. Even the Bishop of Najran know the cultural approach, and he tried to engage at that time. It was not Muslims at that time; they were pagans, they were polytheists, and he reached them through this poetic fair and the gathering of the Arab poets. That is interesting, fascinating. So anyway, so when Prophet Muhammad migrated to Medina, that's another story, and a welcome song that is Tala al-Badruna. It means that the full moon shined on us. It's still actually practiced and sung by few groups. I will try to find out if I could play for you guys how it sound. Tala al-Badruna, the full moon, as a group hymn that was a welcome song by the girls of the Medina for the Prophet. So those actually people who actually say that music is haram or music is not acceptable, not allowed, not permitted in the Islam. Actually, they are unaware, a majority of them unaware these historical incidents and the historical example, even in the life of the Prophet. So that's another example which we could see that. Anyway, so now we understood that the rise of Islam was not out of the vacuum. So that was already, they heard the sound, they heard the practices, they are aware about the Christian worship and Jewish Shema even, and that's where actually they try to relate at first earliest. Actually, Prophet of Islam relate himself as a continuity of the Jewish prophethood in the office of the prophethood. That's why in the earliest stage they were praying with the Jews facing toward Jerusalem. They were have only an annual fasting. The month of Ramadan come later, and so there are various examples which Islam has adopted from the Judaic and Judeo-Christian tradition. So anyway, so when we come to the Islam and relate our Psalmody, so I would like to say that that's what I see, the importance of the vocal in oral tradition. So Islam is primarily an oral tradition. So voice is a chief art, and even voice and oral tradition, voice took a sacramental status. So first of all, now we need to, because I'm going to primarily focusing on the first chanting part, responsorial and antiphonal might be, they need another session. But anyway, so the Quran is primarily a poetic book. It's a poetry. And recitation follows the melodies and the intonation of the Arabs. That's what the Quran says, Surah 26. It says, in a clear Arabic language, that is Surah Al-Shura, when the Prophet says that you recite the Quran in a clear Arabic language. Then the divine message had to be declared clearly. Again, another chapter, another verse says in the Quran, recite the Quran very distinctively, was the command given to the Prophet. So that is what we say, that the voice, the clarification, and then the clarity and the cadence, emotions that were all involved in the Quranic recitation. Even the Hadith tradition says that recommended to the faithful, embellish your voices with the Quran and embellish the Quran with your voices. So you can see that the Quran's recitation was the chief art in the Islamic tradition. Okay, now, so that's why when we see that the Prophet initiated two vocal art, and the first one was azan, is a call of prayer. And that's an interesting point. The history is the first muezzin means a person who called for the prayer, was an African Ethiopian slave of the Muhammad, and his name was Bilal. So he was the first Muslim who recite the call of prayer, and then that become a model. That become a model for all the Islamic world. That's still going on until the 14th centuries. So Bilal the African, and the second one is Qiraat, recitation of the Quran without any instrumental accompaniment. So that's what we need to understand, that the Quranic Islamic religious, especially the canonical voice-centric art, which is called to prayer, and number two is the recitation of the Quran. They are totally solely a cappella or a solo voice, not group voice even. Okay, now, so the four genres of sound art in the Muslim context: number one is the Quranic recitation, number two, the call of prayer, number three, liturgical chants and eulogy chants, which I mentioned earlier, nasheed of the Prophet, that are deeply ingrained in the Islamic tradition. So now let me show you one Islamic call of prayer, and you can see that how it relate with the how it resonate with the Jewish Shema. So this is a call of Islamic prayer. So you can see that this is the call of prayer. And this is, if you read that here, it's a Fajr. Fajr means early morning. There are 5 times: Fajr, Zohar, Asr, Isha, and Maghrib. So these are 5 call of prayer. And the interesting part is this: all 5 times of prayer have a different style, have a different mode which they adopt. For a non-Muslim world, and for the non those who are unaware, they might listen to, oh, it's the same, but it's not the same. Actually, it's the 5 time has a different call and a different kind of a style. So that's what here. Now let's listen the Shema. That's interesting. So you can see that the interesting part is that the call of prayer in the Islam and Shema in the Jewish tradition, they both have the same tone. Even the half of the text is same, actually, because Islam adopted the first half. Listen, O Israel, Lord your God is the one which which this chapter is reciting. Is Hashem is the one God, only one Lord. That's what the call of the prayer. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but one God. Here you go, interesting. So the first formula is also adaptation of the Jewish chanting, and even the style which they have, that was also a part of the Jewish tradition. So okay, so here we are. So that's what we see, that there's what are the convergences with the Islam and the Jewish and the chanting. Okay, now, when we come to the Quranic recitation, as I was mentioned earlier, that the first thing is the chanting and the Quranic recitation. So there are 7 modes of Quranic recitation. Mostly Muslim, they will be defending, and they are apologetic. They have apologetic approach when they say, oh no, there was the God has, and Allah has given only one style of the reciting the Quran, and the Prophet has passed that one, and we don't change that. But actually there was 7 modes of the Quranic recitation, and that was the person who find out this. That was a Muslim scholar, Ibn Mujaddid, in the 10th century. Here you go, 6th century Islam arrived, and the 10th century, this guy, actually Ibn Mujaddid, 10th century choice of the 7 permissible system of vocalizing or voweling the text. So the simple descriptive name of Al-Qira, known as by 2 certified Quranic names, as I mentioned earlier. So Tilawa and Tartil. So these are the 7 modes of the reciting of the Quran, and these 7 modes, like the tilawat, which is in the book, seems to mean no more than simply recitation. In the Quran means tilawat, as I mentioned earlier. Tilawat and tartil, these are the 2 traditional terms which they use to recite the Quran. So tartil means which characterize the recitation, perhaps an orderly and well-spaced recitation where you pause which sound from nasal sound or from the chord sound on the top sound or the lower sound which you want to use, the way God trained it to Muhammad. That's in the chapter 25, and the way the prophet was bidding repeat it to his listeners. So that was two things in the Quran, but actually after 4 centuries, Ibn Mujaddid find out that was not one, that was 7 modes. So what were the 7 modes? That's another session actually. So what is my conclusion here? My conclusion here is that the sunk spirituality of Islam is evident through public piety with artistic expressions of cantillation, which is kirat, then azan, which I mentioned, the sound, and the recitation of milad, majlis, and Sufi sama. So these are all Muslim music cultures genres, which are 2 of them are canonical out of the inside the mosque and totally liturgical, kirat of the Quran and the azan, and the rest of them like recitation of the milad in the praise of the prophet, and the nasheed, and then the majlis is a gathering, and the majlis is also like a Shia majlis. I'll show you a few examples, and then Sufi sama. So these are which can go as a parallel with the historical practices of Psalmody. Now I will show you a few more examples. This one. Okay. Yes. Now I'll show you. Okay, so we have heard Coptic chant. Yes, and here is Quranic recitation. Let's listen. As I mentioned earlier, what is the influence of the African Christianity on the Islamic religious sound? Number 1, azan. That was Ethiopian Bilal, an African slave who initiated and who recited the first azan. So here's the listen, the Quranic recitation.
يسبحون بحمد ربهم يسبحون بحمد ربهم وقضي بينهم بالحق وقيل الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله رب العالمين وغلقت الأبواب وقالت هيت لك وقالت هيت لك وقالت هيت لك وقالت هيت لك وغلقت الأبواب وقالت.
You know what this this African reciter is reciting? That's the story of the Joseph and in the Egypt, when there was the Potiphar's wife, when she tried to seduce him. So that's the story he's reciting, and you can see that the emotive power of this recitation, how it influencing the audience, and people are crying while they're listening this chant and this recitation. So that's interesting to see that how that resonate with our Gregorian chant, or might be the monastic chant, where we can see ourselves. Okay, so let's listen again this one. Okay, so one more example. So this is actually the Shiite commemoration of the massacre of the prophet. And you can see the influence of the monastic chant, because this is a video from Iraq, I think from Karbala. So let's see. Oh no, this is Asma, not this one. Yeah, this one. So you can see this, the Shiite mourning with the rhythmic beat of the beating their chest, and that's how they are mourning. And then the continuity of the rhythm, and then the response and call, the leader call, and then the community respond to that mourning. That's an interesting parallel between the responsorial style. But here is another one, a last example, which I would share with you. That is the 99 names of Allah. You might be heard that how Muslims believe there are 99 names of Allah. But these 99 names are sung and presented in a totally chanting style. And that was again an influence of the monastic chanting. So you can listen and you can see it by yourself.
أسألك يا من هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الرحمن الرحيم الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر الخالق البارئ المصور الغفار القهار الوهاب الرزاق الفتاح العليم القابض الباسط الخافض الرافع المعز المذل السميع البصير الحكم العدل اللطيف الخبير الحليم العظيم الغفور الشكور العلي الكبير الحفيظ المقيت الحسيب.
Okay, so these are the examples which I showed you. This is the last example, and I'm stopped sharing. And so you can see that these are just a tip of the iceberg. I just find out these three historical practices of the chanting and responsorial antiphonal, but these are I just share with you a very brief, like touching the surface, and just give you an idea that how these things can emerge and converge with each other. First of all, we need to understand when we are engaging with the Muslim brothers, sisters, and the neighbors, they belong to an oral culture. Number two, they rely mostly on voice-centric rather than a text memory. That's very important. And number two, the religious canonical chanting and the music is a cappella. It is not with any instrumental accompaniment. And number three, they only sing scriptures. That's where the book of Psalms, Zabur's role came, because Zabur, book of Psalm, is considered as a divine revelation. They accept it as a holy book. Daud is a revered prophet. So that's what we need to understand when we are engaging with our Muslim neighbors. We cannot engage with our preconceived, prescribed ideas for which we were practicing since past 14th centuries, and engaging the oral culture with the literature and the printed material. We need to equip ourselves with the orally in the memorized way, where we can share the scriptures and share with them the divine revelation. May God bless you all. Thank you. We are open for those questions now. Yes.
Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate your presentation. Very provocative. One- we don't have any questions in the chat, but I do have some questions for you myself. One of them is, it seems like most Western Christians, or at least a lot of Western Christians, are somewhat allergic to chant, and are very and view the Psalms primarily as a text to be read rather than songs to be vocalized, as you talked about in your presentation. So I guess I'm wondering what are you suggesting for reform and renewal among Christians, and as they approach their Muslim brothers and sisters and try to find some kind of commonality with them?
Well, first of all, the most common ground through the Psalmody is a divine revelation. So that's most important. We need to know that how they revere the book and the text, especially if it's a divine revelation, number one. Number two is, as I mentioned earlier, when we are engaging and sharing something with them, the collaboration is not from our cultural or the Western perspective. It is how they understand and how they translate. And that's where the role of memory, which my focus is. If you memorize Psalm, and if even if you not recite, and even if you share with them in a reading style, actually, not taking out from the book, that will make an impact, because that's how they preconceived, they prepared, equipped in an orally literate culture.
And did I understand you correctly to say that Muslims do use the Psalms, or are the Psalms part of the Quran, or?
Well, yes, there are Psalms are mentioned in the Quran, like the book of Psalm mentioned almost more than 5 to 6 times, and even David mentioned more than 16 times. Not only Quran, but also in a Hadith literature. That's a tradition. So yes, there's a connection over there. However, Psalms are not part of their worship.
I see.
That's mentioned in the Quran. They have been told, but because I would say that was a missing a link between the Muslim and Christian, because generally, mostly from past 14 centuries, we have been attacked, we have been criticized, they have been fought on the polemical basis based on the Torah, Old Testament, the first 5 books, or in the New Testament on the Injil or the Gospel, the book of Psalm, which also Jesus quoted, Jesus sung, Jesus mentioned, even the Luke chapter 24:44 in the post-resurrection narrative. Jesus told that everything written in the Torah, in the Moses law, and the prophet, and in the Psalms about me, they're fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So I don't know why the church and especially the Western church totally ignored and forget about the major role of the Psalmody and Psalms for bridging peace and interfaith friendship with Muslims.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. As one of our attendees mentioned, it was fascinating and helped her understand better the Syrian family that they sponsored. To kind of get behind practices. And here is another question. In what venues, occasions, or circumstances can this information be applied? Are you envisioning shared worship, evangelization, just general understanding?
That's a very important question. Who is this guy, actually?
This is from Linda Owen. Yes.
Yes, Linda. That's an interesting question, because worship, Islamic worship or Christian worship, although Psalmody is a part of the Christian worship, but not an Islamic worship, because their 5-time namaz, call of prayer, is not included. That's a prescribed, like a Jewish liturgical Psalmody. They were prescribed. You cannot go outside from the prescribed text. But yes, what are the possibilities? Possibilities are collaborative psalm festivals. Then if we are gathering in a way that we have Muslim friends and Christian friends, that's where we can share text and we can share the chanting, that we can share with what the Dawood al-Islam or the Hazrat or the Prophet Dawood says, and this is what we are singing, and I would like to share with you what the Prophet Dawood, how he was singing, or kind of the chanting style, So that is a non-canonical, outside of a worship space. That is more in a collaborative, celebrative space where you celebrate the cultural text where you celebrate the sound and the scripture together.
Very good. Well, I think we've covered the questions that have been raised, and I think we're all richer for having had this experience today, Eric. So thank you very much.
My pleasure indeed.
And thanks to all of you for being with us today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless you all.